is like our 7th session or something, I think. I can't remember. Off we go. Good. Okay, sweethearts. Gallery. I have the gallery. That's it. So let's just find Rinpoche's book again. But okay, let's start again. Thinking we're here, listening, contemplating, analyzing, internalizing, so we can gradually mold our minds into the minds of a Buddha, so we can be a benefit to others. That's why we're here together. Think like that. Okie dokie. So let's ask those questions again, shall we? Continue with questions from the last session.
Okay. So Venerable Barbara, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Robina. And Robina, now
Yes.
this question I have even asked His Holiness. I have asked many. I need to ask a Westerner because I've asked many lamas. None of them even know what I'm talking about.
Okay, go on.
What I want to know is when a baby, when you make, you have with a sperm and egg of the mum,
Yeah.
and then they put it in a tube.
Yes.
How does the consciousness get in there? How does it know?
No, I understand. That's an interesting point. I've discussed that with several geshis and lamas, and I've got at least 2 answers, and each is the exact opposite of the other. So Yangtze Rinpoche in Portland was very clear that the condition that is crucial for the presence of the consciousness to be there has to be the womb. So the egg and the sperm can start to develop in the Petri dish. I mean, this is what's so curious, and it's very puzzling to me. But for example, a friend of mine recently got her egg and sperm, multiple eggs and sperms, and they identified some as girls and some as boys.
Yes.
But the point is, Yangtze Rinpoche is very clear that consciousness does not go there until that egg and sperm are in the fallopian tube. Now, the other Lama said, no, absolutely different. He's a Geshe, and the other one was, they're both Larampa Geshis. And the other Geshe said, no, a consciousness can go into the egg and sperm before it gets to the womb. So they've got to do some more research because this is an unusual situation. And he quoted different texts. He even quoted one in the sutras where there was just one of the cells and not even 2, and that a consciousness was able to be born. So it has to be all there in the sutras, and certainly in the tantras, it's got to be described. But they're the 2 different answers I've received. So who knows?
Thank you.
And it's a very important point, Barbara, because if the egg and the sperm, if the consciousness does go into the Petri dish and you save all these little embryos, the so-called embryos, then you chuck them down the toilet, then that's a type of killing. You're killing a sentient being. But if the consciousness does not go in until it gets to the womb, then you can chuck them all down the toilet. It won't matter. So it's a kind of interesting point. It's a crucial point to understand.
It would be good to know, wouldn't it?
It would be, exactly. There's different discussions. And so, this is what they all debate about. And so until a clairvoyant person can show you and tell you by looking, it's hard to know. And also the other point, they all talk different things about when the consciousness does join the egg and sperm in a normal old-fashioned conception, which means when mummy and daddy have sex. So, I remember myself when I got pregnant, when I was in London in 1968, and I was a hippie, and I remember that abortions had just been approved by the National Health. And I remember, of course, I felt very lucky because I didn't have to pay for it, I was lucky I felt then. So it was interesting because when I was, not trying to be too much information here, but I was this hippie, and I was a good hippie. I was a very kind hippie, and I slept with lots of people. It's okay. But I remember this particular boy, I'm just unnecessary details, but I'm just joking. I was 23 and I was Australian. I just arrived in London about, I've been there a few months, and I met this other Australian. Of course, he lived in Earl's Court, which is the classic thing where all the Australian hippies used to live back in the 60s. Now it's quite different, of course. And I remember I didn't particularly like him, but I remember his name was Rob, and he was an architect. I remember being envious because he was earning £1 an hour. I was earning £13 a week in my little job. So I remember his £1 an hour. Anyway, I remember I got pregnant. But the point is, when I was in bed with him, excuse me the details, that second I knew, I said, oh no, I'm pregnant. Many women tell me that. So that indicates the consciousness normally will go into the egg and sperm. That's what conception means. So another example, a friend of mine, a woman and her daughter and her husband, the daughter and the husband were staying in her house while their house was being built. And the daughter came down for breakfast one morning and said, oh, Mum, I'm pregnant. And the mother said, oh, fantastic. When did you discover? She said, 45 minutes ago. So many women have that experience, which seems to prove this point. But on the other hand, this Yangtze Rinpoche also said, no, it can take a few days before the consciousness comes into the egg and sperm, even though the egg and sperm can start to multiply. So there's different answers. There's no one answer. So it's an interesting discussion. It's a crucial one, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thanks, Barbara, very much.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. There's sorry, Barbara. There's a question in the chat. From Rowena. Rowena, would
What
you
about
like
the
to
emptiness
ask your
We
question?
had what about the emptiness question? We had a woman in
Yeah,
here.
okay. Do you want to do that one
Well,
first?
let's just do the emptiness one last, because we're continuing on that topic.
Okay, so Rowena, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I was wanting to ask what your view is on suicide.
Yes, Rowena, good point. All I can do is quote the Buddhist view, or at least discuss it within the framework of what happens, and analyze it. So one of the crucial things about karma, we didn't go into these details, but now it's a good opportunity. When every millisecond we're doing an action, which means we're creating a karma, and that action is either by the body and the speech or the mind, and it's driven by something in the mind. And the key thing is the motivation in the mind at the time of doing the action. That's the key factor that determines the character of the action. That is to say, whether it's negative or positive, the intensity of it, and therefore it determines the seed that's planted in the mind, and therefore determines the future karmic result. So a classic example of a complete action, let's say, in the case here, an action of killing. I mean, they talk about a complete action of killing. It would need to be somebody else, but it's clearly, obviously, if you're killing yourself, it's still a negative action if the motivation is negative. So let's look at that. So, you've got yourself, there's a person, you, and then that's the first one. There's an object there. So here it's not a separate object, but it's yourself. So there's 4 pieces that have to be in place for an action you do to be what's called a complete action, which is an action that will bring a type of rebirth, a complete action. And there are 4 things in place. So, I mean, clearly it's not another person. The person is yourself. But then the second part of it, the crucial piece, is the mind involved in doing the action. And there are 2 parts there. There's actually more to it than this, but this is keeping it simple. The one is intention, and not in the way of good intention. Intention is the bare bones word that translates as action. That is the real meaning of the word karma, mental action. And it's intention, the thought, I will. So the other part, 2B, is the motivation that informs that intention. But these so totally come together, we think they're the same thing, but they're different. So here, the thought literally is, I will kill myself. We mightn't say it so bluntly, but that's the intention. Because if there weren't the intention, you wouldn't do it. Intention is like really the meaning of karma. It's there in our mind continuously every millisecond, and it literally is the driver of everything we do. If you want a boss in the mind, it's intention, but it's so mostly instinctive and so subtle we don't notice it. But basically, if you don't have the intention to pick up a cup to drink your tea, you won't pick up the cup to drink your tea. It's very simple. If you don't have the intention to stab somebody, you won't stab. Now, we often don't even see this intention because it's so programmed in the mind from past habit, Most of the things we intend to do are truly just instinctive because we've practiced them for so long. Like all the instinctive habits of eating and sleeping and going to the toilet and scratching yourself. We would never think there's an intention there. Of course there is. Your hand would not go to there to scratch if the thought doesn't say, I'll go to there. But that's so quick, you see. So intention is mental action. I will kill myself. Now, the motivation is the key. Now, let's analyze that, Rowena. I mean, we all know, with respect, it's not criticizing anybody. We're also suffering. What is the motivation usually for killing yourself? I mean, we could argue pretty quickly. It's not joy. It's not bliss. It's not compassion. You can imagine a situation in which a person who's very old and is dying and will happily get them to pull the plug and say, I want to die sooner because I don't want to waste all your money and I want to be, and you can imagine it coming from compassion. But our general understanding of suicide is just so despairing. The motivation is despair, hopelessness, not knowing the point of life. Of course it's like that. It's so tragic. And that is the tragedy. Now, that's a negative state of mind because it's related to ego grasping, So any action motivated, driven, especially when it's such as a destructive action to take your own life or to take the life of another, it has to be a very heavy negative action in general, and then the completion of the action, you do the action and then you die. That's pretty much a complete action. So it's kind of tragic. In general, it has to be that it's a negative motivation. Now, I'm always remember, the Vietnam War. There was a lot of politics going on. It wasn't so much about the Vietnam War that these 2 monks, remember there's a picture of those monks on fire? That wasn't about the Vietnam War. It was more about the political thing of the government, the Christian government suppressing the Buddhists. I forget all the logic, the story behind it. But these two monks put themselves on fire. Now you could see they didn't move. They weren't running down the street screaming as they were burning up. Obviously, we can deduce that they had single-pointed concentration. And if you're able to go into samadhi, you don't feel anything. So but we still don't know their motivation. Their motivation might have been political. We don't know that. We don't know their mind, but they wouldn't have suffered because their mind, I mean, they didn't grossly suffer. But when you hear about all those, those poor Tibetans, this holiness is always so sad about all these Tibetans putting themselves on fire in Tibet, I mean, they mean really well. You can see how meaning well is not enough. As Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. Having a good motivation is good for you. But, suddenly if you have a good motivation to put yourself on fire, and then because you have not got any concentration and the suffering is so intense, and you hear these stories of these young Tibetans running down the street screaming in agony, can you imagine dying like that? That could only trigger a negative seed unless your mind is very, very special. Do you see what I'm saying, Rowena? So we can't say for anybody because we're not clairvoyant, but we look at the normal scenario. It's not a happy situation, is it? Does that make sense, darling?
Oh, it does. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Rowena.
Thanks very much, Rowena.
Yeah.
Okay, going to the question in the chat, Venerable Robina, there's two questions from the same person, Ria. One is the emptiness question. The other one she's just sent through now is about the stages of the 8 dissolutions leading to clear light. Which one would you like?
Which one?
It's quite a long question about the stages of 8 dissolutions leading to clear light, and advanced practitioners actually experience them and not just imagine them. How does one? Of course,
the great, as Lama says, Rinpoche says in the chapter, the death is what the yogis have been waiting for. Yeah. Obviously, the more you've got concentration, the more you've actually accomplished single-pointed concentration, and the more you've practiced every single day in your meditation and are able to go through the 8 stages in your mind actually, and your mind actually gets more subtle, and you actually go to the subtle mind, then of course, when you do it, you're actually doing it when you meditate at the time of death. It's an actual experience. Of course it is.
Yeah, thank you, Robina. She goes on to ask, it's about determining how does one distinguish that the experience is valid. I think it's talking from an ordinary person's experience. How does one distinguish that the experience is valid and not a hallucination? Because initially we visualize these stages in our sadhanas. Also, it is said that one cannot experience mother clear light before the moment of death. And the clear light one may experience during a highest Yoga Tantra sadhana is the child clear light and not actual clear light.
That's right. Yes, the actual clear light is the actual clear light. But how do you distinguish? But I mean, that's a fairly obvious answer. If you're playing the piano and you're learning to play Bach, you're asking the question, how do I know if I'm actually playing proper Bach or not? Well, honey, if you don't know that what you're playing is valid music, you're in serious trouble. You're living in la la land. And how do you check? Because you've got the music in front of you. How do you know that you've spoken the right words in a foreign language? Because you've got the book in front of you. How do you know if you realize anything? How do you know if you know that 1 + 1 is 2 and not just pretending? Because you know the number. So if you don't know that you've achieved 1 + 1 is 2, if you don't know that you're playing Bach when you are playing Bach, then you're living in la la land. You're insane. So wisdom is not just based on some hippie trippy thing living in the sky. It's a referential thing. It's contingent on knowing the theories. So if you practice, if you follow any theory properly, you'll be able to distinguish between knowing the theory of 1 + 1 and the experience of 1 + 1. If you don't, then you don't know. Then you're in serious trouble.
Okay.
You're just mad. You're insane. It's a very important point to make. We often ask this question about spiritual experiences. How do I know if I've realized it? Well, if you don't, then you haven't realized it. It's pretty obvious, isn't it?
Thank you,
so
Rabbi.
The point about the clear light, of course you don't. The greatest yogis can experience, but only in certain circumstances in this life. Mostly, if you read Lama Yeshe's book, Bliss of Inner Fire, he explains those circumstances, but most people have to wait unless they've had that special circumstances, they have to wait until the death time comes in order to get the actual experience, because that mind is the subtlest mind. And that is the one that can actually realize and actually achieve the real clear light and actually become a Buddha. Well, eventually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robina, there's another question that's just come through in chat. Would you like to take that one before the emptiness question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so this has come from Kelly. Kelly, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, it's just in the 8th stage of death,
Yes.
when the indestructible drop splits open,
Yes.
the actual kind of moment of death,
Yes.
where that leaves from varies.
Sorry, darling, where what?
And leaves the body from.
Oh, it leaves from that indestructible drop. And then depending on the rebirth you're going to get, your consciousness will leave through the eyes, the mouth, the anus, the sex organ, or the crown, or whatever.
That, when you were saying that you can tell that the consciousness has left the body.
Yes.
Because, you see the red drop from
And come out through the nostril or the sex organ, yeah, depending on a male or female. Yes, that will be one sign.
But if it, I think I'm getting a bit confused.
Yeah, you're confusing the mind with the drop.
Yes, I think I am.
The mind goes through the eyes, the mouth, the anus, but the drop, the physical component, comes through the nose or the sex organ. That's the difference, darling.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Okay, so
Are there any other questions before Robina takes this last emptiness question? Susie, you've got your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you for the teachings, Venerable.
Good,
so my mum is deaf. So when she's dying and I'm singing my head off in the hospital or hopefully at home, I mean, I presume it's like the creatures that I sing to constantly in the house. I don't know if they have hearing. And people that have died, that have passed away, I don't know. So I just sing and trust that it works. But I feel compelled to ask, instead of just trusting things, I just want to ask, I trust that it will work.
You know, this is the interesting experience. Like, remember we discussed people who are unconscious in the hospital on the operating table, and they have a vivid experience of exactly what's going on, hearing all the doctor's discussion, because your subtle mind has the capability. Even though your ear consciousness has stopped, your subtle mind has this capability. I gave the example of when I was in a retreat back when I first became a nun in Dharamsala, and we had a 3-month retreat, and very intense retreat. And then we would have a nap during the lunchtime, and I had these vivid, crystal clear dreams, which is most subtle consciousness, but also I was vividly aware. I was fast asleep, but I was vividly aware of all the conversations around. So your subtle mind can be conscious, can be aware of what's happening. It doesn't happen every time. That's the example of the story of the person, I quoted from that book by that man called Nick Teresi, the book called Undead, all the problems and obstacles now that they're having in the American medical profession, and it must be everywhere, about when is death. So, this one woman on the operating table, completely called dead, kept alive, breathing with her heart, but as far as they're concerned, dead. But the Buddhist view, only her subtle mind is conscious. And then her heartbeat was seen to go from 100 beats to 200 beats a minute the moment they got the circular saw to cut her open to take her organs. So her gross consciousness was definitely ceased. All her ears, eyes, all gone. But her subtle mind must have been observing what was going on, because she still knew it was her, so she freaked out because she could see what they were doing and hear what they were doing. So the subtle mind is capable. So you might, your mum, even though she's deaf, she might not be aware of her subtle mind, but when she's asleep, it's more likely that she could be aware of it. And certainly the animals, absolutely, of course, you put it on for the animals just in case, no question. You with me?
Thank you. I assumed that. I just felt like I needed to ask. And also just in case for some crazy reason, if there was anything else you could do specifically for a deaf person, but just carry on as normal. I appreciate it.
The sound, the ear consciousness is the most vivid one of all, because even if you can be in a dream, you can still, your eyes, you can't, well, no, the mental conscious can also see. Those people are looking, having those experiences, out of body experiences. They're fast asleep, but they're seeing and hearing. Your mental conscious can do this. So animals, animals can hear things. Some animals must hear things. And just that they say the blessing of these Sanskrit sounds is so potent, it leaves the imprint in their mind. But even for animals, seeing the shape of, seeing a picture, seeing a Buddha, seeing a human being, even just seeing you, like your little pet, let's say, and he's dying, seeing you leaves an imprint of a human body, and that can get it, because he's attached to you, that could be the thing he grasps at the time of death. And while you're singing a mantra to him and he's grasping at you, this could be the trigger to trigger a karmic seed to get a human body. So there's these things, yeah. Is that helpful, Susie?
Thank you, Susie. Venerable Robina, there's
you.
another question that's just come up in chat. Are you happy to take it, or would you?
Yeah, sure, go for it. All the questions are important, yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's come from Claire, and she's asking, if you are a nurse and you give the tablets which are given for a woman for them to abort their fetus, what karma does that leave with you?
Well, you know, if it's your job, everything is to do with the intention, I will, and then your motivation. You know, so there's 100 variations there. So the same as, remember, a cook telling me he had 6 babies and a wife and had to work, and he had to kill lobsters every day, you know, otherwise he'd lose his job. So it's all a question of your motivation. I mean, you know, Tibetans, when they were in prison and then they were forced to kill goats and animals, it's all a question of your motivation. I mean, if you're able to sacrifice your own life and refuse to do it, so you lose your job, that's very courageous. But you have to, it's up to every one of us, it's up to what we can and can't do. There's not some vivid law there. Everybody, it's up to what each of us can do, what we're capable of, you know. So if you have to give the tablet, you are absolutely killing a fetus. Of course you are. Of course you are. Of course you are. If you're killing that lobster, you're killing that lobster. So you've got to decide on your motivation. You know, your genuine wish because you don't have enough courage to give up the job. Or I'm just talking. You know, and so to truly not want to harm anybody and to try and have the compassion for this being and to have compassion for the mother because she's creating the karma of killing and the doctors are creating the karma of killing. It's this whole scenario, you know. We do the best we can, but being conscious and trying to have the best motivation possible. But yeah, it's not a question of getting away with something or it's not my fault or you know, everything we do brings result. So we've got to be as conscious as we can, do the best that we can and have the purest motivation that we can. But if we can really decide never to do an action that will take a single life, that's very courageous, isn't it? So that's what we can do, isn't it? Karma takes care. It's a natural law. No one's going to judge us or reward us or punish us. The extent of what our mind does is the karma that we create. So the more aware we are of this law, the more we can make conscious decisions. I hope that makes sense. What else?
Thank you, Claire. There's another one, Venerable Robina, that's come through from Alia, who's asking if I have teachings or mantras playing in one ear or in the background while I'm at work or otherwise busy,
yes,
and my full attention is elsewhere.
Still leaves an impression in your mind. It still leaves an imprint. Everything leaves an imprint. But obviously, everything, the stronger the imprint, the more you're focused, the more you're aware. But it will leave an imprint. Of course it will. Everything leaves an imprint.
She just goes on to say, but, you know, my attention is switching between the teachings and the mantras and the activity I have to do. Is that worthwhile? Because the subconscious will hear it all.
What? I didn't get that point.
Yeah, it was the second part of the question. So she's saying...
What's the scenario again?
Well, she's...
Will I just speak it, Steph?
Yes, please do, Alia.
Sorry. So I had this idea. We went out to get ice cream because my husband wanted to go. So I'm sitting in the car doing nothing. So I sat on my phone with the devotion CD. I had that in, and then I had Lama Zopa in, but and then I had mantras playing as well, but it's in one ear. So when my husband's not speaking to me, I'm paying full attention to the teaching and what I'm hearing, but when he's speaking to me, I'm speaking to him, so my attention switched. And I kind of thought to myself, is it really worthwhile if I do that like all day in one ear or in the background?
Well, I mean, you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, yes, but it's also going to become a bit ridiculous, isn't it? If you never can pay full attention to what your husband's saying, because you're trying to get the Dharma in. I mean, if you're really skillful, you can do many things at once, but your mind can only really focus on one thing at a time, no matter how tiny it is. So of course it's better than nothing. It is better than nothing. And if you've got it in the background in your mind, it's always there when you're doing other things. And if you can be fully, you know, I mean, just leave it for, yeah, I mean, of course, everything's a question of your skill, isn't it? Of course, everything's worthwhile if you can do it. If you can be, even as you're talking to your husband, you can be thinking of compassion. Oh, wow, amazing. Even as you're speaking to your husband, you're hearing Om Mani Padme Hum in the back of your head. Wow, fantastic. So yeah, the more the better. The more training, the more programming you can do better, clearly. But you know, if it gets to the point where you crash the car because you forgot which to pay attention to, the cars or your mantra, you're in trouble. So it's up to what your skill is, isn't it, Aya?
Yeah, I mean, I'm practicing kind of switching back and forth because I'm trying to do that anyway with watching my mind, to kind of go into my mind and switch back and forth.
That's good, darling. Fine.
Yeah.
Keep moving. As you get more skillful, you get more sophisticated at it. Wonderful. Thanks, Isla.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. So let's answer Ria's question about emptiness, shall we? So read it out.
Yeah,
again.
there is another one that's just popped up into
Okay.
to chat
What is it?
from Svetlana. She's asking, is a POA practice on a daily basis a good preparation for death?
I mean, Rinpoche talks about it all the time. He mentions it in the book, and it is a very popular practice among some Tibetan, Tibetan traditions. It is a very popular practice. And of course, if that's the one you've got, it's a particular karmic connection you have, it's the one that your Lama gives you, but as Rinpoche often talks about, we can do all these fancy talks. We can do all these fancy techniques, tantric techniques, and get very carried away with Tantra. But if we forget bodhicitta and forget living our life properly, then we're in trouble, And frankly, I mean, I've never done the practice. It's there. There's a version in the back. And if it's one of your Lama's particular practices, and some traditions do it more than others, and if it's one that you do, then marvelous. Practice it. It's incredible. I mean, Rinpoche mentions in the book on Amitabha chapter that, Milarepa's disciple says, if you've really practiced it and you've shown signs in your practice, then it's absolutely incredible. At this time of death, you will fly like an eagle to Amitabha's Pure Land. So you have to know which practice is best. And that means that any practice, you've got to know which is best. And that's based upon your Lama, his style. I mean, I don't know anybody who does Amitabha. I know Rinpoche gave it one time in my 45 years of knowing him that I've noticed. It doesn't mean it's not a good practice. It's up to you, your lineage, your practice, what you're capable of. It's your decision, sweetheart.
Thank you.
But clearly, if you think about it, it's a pretty advanced practice. I mean, most of us if you have no control, let's say, over your sleeping process, then how can you possibly control your death? To think that if you can't do the POA, if you can't be conscious of this deconstruction of your own components when you're going to sleep and to meditate, how can you do it at death? So think about it. It's a really quite advanced practice. It's a quite advanced practice. So if you can imagine, you can be totally conscious at the time of death. And if you can be conscious at the time of death, you can be conscious during your time of sleep. So you've got to know where you're at,
Sorry, could I clarify? Then it's better to practice first dream yoga and after it kova. Then it will be better.
Sorry, darling, Svetlana, to practice what first?
Dream yoga.
Dream yoga.
All of these practices are all advanced practices in Tantra. All of them are advanced practices. And if you are capable of practicing these, this implies you've practiced renunciation. It implies you've got bodhicitta. You can practice bodhicitta. It implies you can realize emptiness. You've got to have the ground of all the sutra practices first. You've got to have those in your mind. Then you can practice dream yoga. Then you can practice POA and all the tantric practices. Okay. In other words, what I'm suggesting, Svetlana, and I'm not suggesting you, but it's very easy to get very caught up with, very enthralled by all the amazing tantric practices, but they are necessarily the most advanced. And as Tsongkhapa says in one of his Lamrim texts, your success at the tantric practices is based upon your success in the sutra practices. And your sutra practices give you the ability to be able to be successful in Tantra. As long as we understand the levels of practices and where they all fit, then we'll be okay.
To be more conscious, okay. To be more conscious and to do everything step by step.
Precisely, darling. It's all there for a reason. It's all in all the traditions, it's the same. You do the junior school first. You've got to control your body and speech. You've got to live according to karma. If you don't have good ethics, Svetlana, if we don't have good ethics, which is junior school, we cannot do anything in more advanced. Forget it. And then you go to the next level. If you can't control your attachment, it is impossible to practice Tantra. It is impossible to practice Tantra. Okay. So we have to realize this. Then we'll be very humble and practice. And then when we really practice good ethics and really practice controlling attachment and really practice loving kindness and bodhicitta, death will be blissful. And this is what Lama Zopa says in the chapter, which I haven't talked about, doing the 5 powers throughout the life and at the time of death. It's totally related to practicing bodhicitta. And as Pabonka Rinpoche says, that is the best POA. That's the best way to transfer your consciousness, by living a life of morality and goodness and bodhicitta.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Svetlana. Venerable Robina, Elizabeth has a question on emptiness. Would you like to deal with that one first before the one that we had before the break?
Let me hear them. I don't know. Let me hear them.
Okay. Elizabeth, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you again for the opportunity, Venerable. this week I've been celebrating 8 years of the diagnosis of a life-threatening disease, as we discussed when we met in Land of Joy. And following, you know, my readings and all that, I'm trying. I would be very interested if you could direct me to any neuroscience reading or an astrologer. That I'm trying to unlabel that picture that I've been shown of a meningioma or brain tumor.
Darling, I'm a bit confused. I'm a bit lost. I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. Just
Yeah.
ask me the question. Ask me the question. Okay, what's the
Well,
question?
it's how to, I'm looking at unlabeling this, what I've been shown by the doctor as cancer, and taking that label in order to, what I've read, to taking the label from the form, from the picture I've been given, and giving it, you know, another label, and trying to realize that emptiness and lack of absence of cancer. So if you had any tip or advice of how to realize that technically, that visualization.
Darling, it's not a visualization, really. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of interpreting. So, you know, we go right back to karma, forget emptiness. We go right back to the first level of practice. And let's say we understand technically that every moment that we label an experienced pleasure, for example, we only have pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings, Elizabeth. There's the only kind. We don't use the word feeling like that in our culture. We use it as an equivalent of an emotion. But this technically, the way we're constructed with our mind and our body, we only have anything that's called a pleasant feeling. And that can be from the most mild pleasant feeling, you know, to the most intense bliss. Then we have unpleasant feelings, which can be triggered. There can be the most mild, unpleasant feeling to the most intense mental and physical suffering. And then we have neutral feelings. Well, forget the neutral feelings. So right now, there's, you know, you've been labeled suffering from a cancer. One of your organs is not behaving properly. So that's, you know, that's the body being sick, the body being sick. So we understand karma, then the body being sick is an experience of suffering that is caused by our past negative action. Any moment of happiness, of good health, you know, your good health, for example, if you're experiencing good health, then that's the fruit of your virtuous karma. So every second we think of any moment of suffering, a headache 1 minute, a pain in our thumb, an organ not working properly, a label called cancer on a particular cell that's behaving weird. We have to sort of break it right down to its component parts. It's simply called sickness. In general, it's called sickness. And in general, sickness is one of the karmic results of past harming. I mean, that's the way to do the deconstruction. You don't need a picture. You don't need a visualization. This is, and cause and, we're talking cause and effect here. This is a way to understand emptiness. When you realize that every single moment is the result of a past action, every millisecond of your experiences in the day, a moment of happiness or a moment of suffering, they're each of them the fruit of a past action. This is dependent arising already. This is really practical. So then it will loosen the grip of the fear and the drama that comes. Oh my God, I've got cancer, or whatever. I've got a headache, or I've got a migraine. When we've got ego grasping, clinging to a self-existent me, having a sickness called a self-existent migraine, and then we have panic and fear, that's because we're clinging too concretely at it. So loosening the grip, even by understanding karma, is a way to loosen the grip of ignorance and understanding the emptiness of it. That's a more practical, down-to-earth way.
Because at the first, obviously, I've been, you know, when I've been told.
What, sweetheart?
At the first, when I've been told, I was obviously having a panic attack. But now, that 8 years down the line, I can realize how much joy and light, and I can only be grateful for the teachers and Land of Joy, who have brought so much, you know, acceptance.
Yes, that's right.
And light, and although the emotion to bring out.
That's right.
I can say that I am in peace with it, and I don't suffer. I'm very lucky that I don't suffer, and that I say it has brought, obviously at the start, it brought my life completely upside down. It changed everything, But
so then why are you wanting to do more? You're doing everything so far perfectly. You've got all the right results. You've learned from this experience. You're accepting karma. And as a result, you're seeing the good things. You're doing the practice called transforming problems into happiness. You're doing everything perfectly. Don't try to do more. My God, you're doing everything perfectly, Elizabeth.
Well, I'm not.
But listen, this is proving emptiness. This is the point. Understanding that this thing called cancer does not exist from its own side without your mind calling it cancer, and then all the consequences that come from that. The typical view is, oh my God, I've got cancer, I'm full of despair, I'm going to die, I'm angry, who to blame, what am I going to do? That's the usual one. Well, you've transformed it. You have got cancer. It's 8 years now, celebrating the anniversary of your cancer. You know, the fact is, you know, you're already seeing it as not having an intrinsic nature. You're already able to transform it into happiness. You're doing everything perfectly, Elizabeth. It's amazing.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not pretending to be perfect, and I would like, you know, to be doing more, and mainly to help others throughout my experience, which is the first thought who came, you know, and that I can remember Ariane, I pronounce her name the French way, when she talked about the fact that she felt somebody touching her shoulder. For me, the first thought who came when they told me, you've got a brain tumor, we're not sure what it is, although it's benign, which is my big chance. I'm very lucky, and I feel lucky since the beginning, thinking it's only one and it's benign. But obviously, although it's a challenging way because where it is located, but the first thought that came to my mind when they told me the diagnosis was, this experience need to be of use for other people, and I didn't know anything
You're doing
about
all the right things, darling. You're doing all the right things, Elizabeth. Just keep practicing every day. But the real basic one is realize impermanence, because the fact of the matter is you might have a tumor, but people who can be thoroughly healthy can drop dead overnight. So it's like a joke to even think, even when we've got sickness that is called malignant, you could still die from another cause. You could drop dead from a car accident. So when we realize impermanence, everything changes as well. And that helps us see it as dependent arising. And it helps us use experience to get joy and to be of benefit to others. Everything is perfect. You're doing everything perfectly. I can't imagine.
I do believe it's impermanent, and I focus on that the fact that if I have created it on my karma, it can change and it can transform. But that thought who came to me as soon as they gave me the diagnosis, thinking this experience, whatever the outcome, must be of use to others.
There you go. It's amazing. You're doing perfectly. And the point is, there's two approaches. There's the two wings of the bird, Elizabeth. One is the explicit teaching on wisdom, which is emptiness. And one is the explicit practice and teaching on compassion. So each has the other built in. So if you're practicing compassion properly, which is what you sounds to be doing, is the explicit one you're doing, emptiness is implied within that. And if you're taking the wisdom approach, then it brings more compassion. So you're doing everything perfectly, Elizabeth. There's nothing more to say to you. Keep practicing, keep studying.
Thank you very much, Venerable Robina. Thank you to everyone listening, and to Lord of Joy for the opportunity to be together.
Good, darling. So now give me Ria's question.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so this, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. So this is the question from Ria, Venerable Robina, which was, how can one understand form is emptiness and emptiness is form?
Yeah.
And how can it be understood when it's said in the Heart Sutra that there is no attainment and no non-attainment?
Okay, first of all, the Heart Sutra, what is it? It's Buddha giving one of his many teachings, and he gave the teachings in this way very often. And that is to say, he's sitting there in meditation. It says it at the very beginning. There's Buddha, you know, in the concentration. He's sitting in meditation. So if you can visualize Vulture Peak, this little spot there, you know, I always joke about it because it says with a great host of monks and a great host of bodhisattvas. If you've been to Bodh Gaya, been to Vulture Peak, you know, it's a very tiny place. So I always wondered where everybody sat, this great host of monks and great host of bodhisattvas. So I asked Geshe Dagpa, a wonderful Lama in San Francisco. He said, oh, what do you think? In the sky. So I always love it. You think, so we visualize, there they all are, all the great beings sitting in the sky, blissing out. And there's Buddha in meditation, but he's channeling his thoughts into the minds and mouths of his disciples, Shariputra and 10th level Bodhisattva Avalokitesvara as a human being. And they're having a conversation, as you know. So it says, you know, Shariputra says to Avalokitesvara, how should any child in good family who wishes to, you know, the perfection of wisdom, how should he practice? And then Shariputra spoke to the Venerable Shariputra as Avalokitesvara spoke to the Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, any son or daughter of good family who wishes to expand the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this. And then he proceeds to list the various components of the universe according to Buddha's view of the world. First, the 5 aggregates, then the 18 constituents, the 6 senses, the 6 sense bases, the 6 sense objects, then the 12 links, the 4 noble truths, etc., etc., etc. So basically also the crucial thing to understand is this entire Heart Sutra is spoken from the point of view of the yogi absorbed in meditation. So it says, in emptiness, there is no, and then it proceeds to list all the things that there are no of. So it's got to be, first of all, it's the vision of the yogi in meditation where there are no appearances of these things. That will be accurate. So there is no, from the appearance of the yogi, there is no form, there is no feeling, there is no this, there is no that. But in a general sense, you can imply its meaning from ordinary daily life, ordinary point of view. There is no inherent this, there is no inherent that, there is no inherent this, there's no inherent attainment, there's no inherent non-attainment. It's just making sure that everything, we are knowing that everything that does exist conventionally has no ultimate, has no intrinsic character. So where he even says there is no attainment and there's no non-attainment, what that means is, spelling it out, there is no attainment of wisdom, which means realizing emptiness. There's no intrinsic attainment of wisdom. And then it says no non-attainment. Non-attainment refers to the emptiness of attainment. And even there's no emptiness of attainment, because emptiness also doesn't exist from its own side. Whatever exists, including emptiness, has no intrinsic nature. That's the one point. Now, the other point is this, where he says at the very beginning, he uses the first of the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the way that Buddha has broken down the components of a person into these 5 little bundles of things. The first is called form, which is referring to the physical. Then there's feeling and discrimination, these 2 of the 51 mental factors that are there every second in our mind that play a major role in perpetuating our samsara. Then there's form, feeling, discrimination, non-associated, compounded phenomena. Compounded phenomena is one of the many synonyms for impermanent phenomena. And so this is a little grab bag of leftover bits and pieces, the other 49 mental factors and all the other bits and pieces that are neither mind nor matter. And then the 5th one is called consciousness, which is mind in general. Okay, so now, Avalokitesvara says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Now, form is empty. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. Well, technically they aren't correct, but the meaning is this. It's where we can guarantee we don't fall, as Tsongkhapa says, by understanding these 2 truths together: conventional truth, labeled form; ultimate truth, the emptiness of intrinsic form; conventional truth, conventional form; ultimate truth, the emptiness of intrinsic form. Right now, conventional truth and ultimate, dependent arising and emptiness, we hear them as separate. We hear them, we've got wrong views. But in reality, they're flip sides of the same thing. Saying conventional form means dependent arising form. That's another way of saying emptiness of intrinsic form. Use the word dependent. So conventional is dependent arising form, form that exists in dependence upon various factors. Form that exists in dependence upon various factors. Dependent form. Well, clearly, dependent form is the same meaning as absence of independent form. So emptiness is the flip side of dependent arising. Dependent arising is the flip side of emptiness. So therefore, you cannot have conventional form without right there on that conventional form, without the, you can't have that without right there on that conventional form, the characteristic called emptiness of independent form. So in other words, form is empty. So spelling it out. Dependent arising form, form that exists in dependence upon various factors, is empty of independence. And wherever you find the emptiness of independent existent form, you're going to find right there dependent form. You can't have one without the other. This is the guaranteed way not to fall into the abyss of the great mistake. So wherever there is form, right there on that conventional form, you will find the characteristic right there on that conventional form. You will find the characteristic of the absence of independent form. Right there. And wherever, the next one, form is emptiness is form. Wherever you find the absence of independent form, you can only find that right there on the interdependent form. So form is empty. Then when you find the emptiness of independent form, you're going to find right there that exists where there is the form. You can't have one without the other. That's the point. And this is the way the Buddha is telling us that we cannot, you know, it's a guaranteed way not to fall into the abyss of the great mistake. Using Kate's example of a pink thermos. Wherever you find black thermos, for Kate, when she's realized the truth, you will find right there on this black thermos the presence of the characteristic called absence of pink thermos. You can't find over here absence of pink thermos and over there black thermos. That's schizophrenic. If you've got a black thermos for Kate, who thought first it was pink, but she's now seeing the truth, then she's realized the absence of pink. And where is that phenomenon called absence of pink? It's a real phenomenon she's realized. She's realized the absence of pink. Where? Not in the sky. Oh, everything's not pink. Don't be ridiculous. Absence of pink exists exactly on the black thermos. So black thermos is absent of pink. Absence of pink is black thermos. Black thermos is absence of pink, and absence of pink is black thermos. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. The two have to be together. The key to understanding this, and when we hear emptiness, we hear nothingness, so we're confused. But when we hear it's simply the name of a characteristic that everything that does exist possesses. Emptiness of inherent existence is a characteristic of everything that exists. It's not, oh, there's nothing. That's nihilism, and that's why we get it so confused. Does that help? Ria? If there's more questions, please ask. So the key here is to get the right definitions, to get the right use of the words, and the penny will drop, you know.
Thank you very much, Venerable Robina, and thank you, Ria, for asking the question. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions for Venerable Robina? If you do, if you'd like to raise your blue hand, so it's easier for me to sort of see, because we're across 2 pages on the screen. Any other questions for Venerable Robina? So Kimberly, is that a hand going up, Kimberly? Would you like to unmute?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm doing my best here with emptiness as form. Yeah. I've struggled with this like a word puzzle in my mind like a million times, but I guess what I'm wondering is if emptiness is a lack of inherent existence, something that can't exist from its own side. And then the other side of the coin is dependent arising, which makes me think of ecosystems or interdependent components that are almost like outside forces that create some kind of entity that doesn't exist from its own side, like a tree or something.
I get a bit confused now. Just keep it more simple. Use any phenomenon, use any simple thing like a cup or a toilet or Kimberly as your example, and explain to me how you understand these two together.
So in the absence of inherent existence, so in the absence of a self-existent I, the belief in a self-existent I.
Yes. So where, okay, first you've got to get used to the idea, Kimberly, that is a characteristic of something. Emptiness of inherent existence is a characteristic of something that exists. So what is the thing that possesses the characteristic of emptiness of inherent existence here? What's the example you're using?
So I'm just thinking that the perception of that emptiness of...
No, I need to ask my question.
Okay.
I need to ask her my question. So we are looking, first we have to start with something that does exist. So the thing we're using is the person called Kimberly. Is that our example of the thing that does exist?
Okay.
We have to do that. We've got to start with something.
Okay.
Because the black thermos, we have to first establish what it is before we can then see what the mistake that Kate's making, isn't it? Can you understand that? Kate, we have to first establish what does exist. We have to establish it's a thermos and it's black. The color is black. Keep it simple. There's a thing and the color is black. Now, Kate's eyes are mistaken and she sees pink there. Can you accept that that's a mistake?
Yeah.
And can you accept that she's decorating on top of a black thermos a characteristic that doesn't exist there called pink? Can you accept that?
Yeah.
Okay, so she's making a mistake. So right now, there is a person called Kimberly, conventionally speaking, that we have to first establish the presence of a person called Kimberly, dependent arising. And now we have to see that in Kimberly's mind, there's a delusion called ignorance. In Kate, it's called wrong eyes. In your mind, it's called ignorance. And that deep ignorance is decorating on top of what is there, called Kimberly, a characteristic that isn't there, called intrinsic or independent existence. Now that's the mistake that ignorance is making. So when you think of Kimberly, she appears to you as intrinsic. She appears to you as not dependent arising. This is very subtle because we don't see it. So there's a mistake your mind is making. So when you've realized the mistake, like Kate, when we fix her eyes, and the black thermos appears to her eyes again, black will appear, but she will get the shock of her life. Because now she's realized that there's no pink there. So she just has a realization of the absence of pink.
Yeah.
So then Kimberly is existing, but the delusions in Kimberly's mind are decorating on top of what does exist. In this case, a specific characteristic called independent Kimberly. That does not exist on Kimberly. So the realizing the emptiness of that, the absence of that, realizing that Kimberly doesn't exist. So that absence is a cognition you have of the absence right there of independent existence. So when Kate when she sees the absence of pink, where does that absence of pink exist?
I don't know.
Where do you think it exists? There's a phenomenon called the absence of pink. And she's just cognized it. Where does that actual phenomenon called the absence of pink exist?
It doesn't exist anymore.
No. The absence of pink does exist. Pink doesn't, but the absence of pink definitely does exist. And that's the emptiness of pink. That's a real phenomenon that does exist that her mind cognizes.
So she sees the black thermos.
So the black thermos, we fixed her eyes now. We fixed her eyes, right? We fixed her eyes, right? First of all, you have to establish we fixed her eyes. And the black thermos appears to her eyes. The black will appear, but the real thing, she'll get the shock of her life. Oh my God, it's not pink. That cognition is called absence of pink. So where does that absence of pink exist?
I don't know. I
Okay.
don't understand that.
Good. Now, this is why you can't understand the previous point. So we'll get this point clear, then you'll get it. I pick up my cup, and it usually holds my tea, right? So far, so good?
Yeah.
And I go to drink it, and I notice there's no tea in there. And I'll go, oh my God, there's no tea. I'll say that, won't I?
Yeah.
So now what is the thing? What's the name of the phenomenon I just cognized? Turn that into a noun. What is the name of the phenomenon I just cognized?
Absence of tea.
Thank you. So where does the absence of tea exist?
In your thermos.
Thank you. That's the same as the absence of intrinsic Kimberley. Absence of intrinsic Kimberley exists right on the conventional Kimberley. These are the two truths together. You can't have one without the other.
Oh. So the dependent arising phenomenon is...
Which is called Kimberley.
Kim.
What?
And then the realization that there's no intrinsic...
Inherent Kimberley, right there. Yes. So form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, emptiness is nothing other than form. They both exist in the same place. They're not separate.
Cool.
That's right.
That's going to take a while.
That's right. But it's a good start, darling.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, sweetheart. So it's not nothingness.
Yeah, I get in that sinkhole.
That's everybody falls into the trap. We all fall to the abyss of the great mistake. Oh, chuck out all the bits looking for the eye and we can't find it. Oh, there's no eye. I might as well kill myself, you know. No.
It's such an extremist mind for me. It's like all in, all out, you know. So
right. It's more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
So emptiness of inherent existence is a characteristic of what exists, which is in this case Kimberley. So the emptiness of inherent existence of Kimberley is a characteristic of the conventional Kimberley. The emptiness of pink is a characteristic of a black thermos. The emptiness of tea in my thermos. The emptiness of tea is a characteristic within my thermos. The two truths go together. So where you find form, you will find right there the emptiness of intrinsic form. And whenever you find the emptiness of intrinsic form, you will find right there form. You can't have one of these truths without the other. They're different ways of seeing the same thing.
So do you find something new when you, if you had a strong realization of emptiness?
There's plenty more to realize yet, but that's the major turning point. You can't fall back after that. You can't go back into the samsara after that. You can't go to the lower realms and you've cut the major cause of all suffering. You got to perfect that realization and add bodhicitta to it and become a Buddha. There's more to do yet, but you can't fall back. That's a crucial turning point. Because the basis, once you've realized emptiness, there is no fear. There's no longer there's no longer the belief in that intrinsic I. Therefore, there's no longer attachment to the fantasy I. Therefore, there's no panic about aversion and fear and drama and anxiety and jealous and depression and all the other garbage. There can't be. There's residual results of it all, but you've cut the root of the belief in all the dramas. So you've quit fear. This is why this story of Lama Zopa, which I always tell. I mean, I'll tell it here as well before we finish. When he's nearly drowning. Okay, darling.
That's very appealing.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
Go on, people.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Venerable Robina, there's another question from Ria that's come in the chat, which is saying, if one was to say that even emptiness of inherent existence is empty of itself.
Not empty of itself, no. Wrong.
But shall I just finish the question first and then you've got the whole context? Yet that should mean something still exists. Otherwise, we would fall to nihilism. Is this line of thought correct?
No, it is not empty of itself. It is also, okay, listen, the simple point is this. First, we must establish that there are billions upon billions of phenomena that exist in the universe. There are all kinds of phenomena. There are many synonyms. So the definition of an existent, one of the synonyms for a phenomenon, objective knowledge, established base, there are various synonyms. So one of those synonyms is existent and existent. So the point is that what defines something as existing is that it can be cognized by mind. It's axiomatic that what mind cognizes is that which exists. So, first point. Now, we've got all kinds of ordinary phenomena like thermoses and computers and, you know, tables and floors and chairs and toilets. Billions and billions of regular, impermanent, physical phenomena. Pretty easy. Then we have other billions of phenomena called minds and moments of mind, like anger, like a jealousy, like love. Each of those is a phenomenon, is an existent. Now, there are other kinds of phenomena, which we're just pointing here, that are more abstract. So when Kate has fixed her eyes and she stops the lie that she has been believing in, that there is pink on that black thermos, that's not a valid cognition. There is no pink there, but she has believed in pink all the time. She thinks pink is an existent phenomenon, but it's not existing there. Her eyes are making a mistake. Equally, a self-existent me does not exist, but we believe in the presence of that. The delicious cake on the plate over there does not exist because attachment is making up a story. So this is Buddha's entire point. We have to learn to distinguish between facts and fictions in our mind. So a negative neurotic state of mind is a lie that believes in something that doesn't exist out there. The cake on that plate that my attachment sees doesn't exist. There is a cake there, but attachment has embellished the cake. Delusions all embellish. Delusions decorate on top of what is there, characteristics that aren't there. So we have to learn to distinguish between the facts in the mind and the fictions in the mind. So that we have to establish what exists. Now, there's all kinds of phenomena that exist. Simple ones like thermoses and plates and computers. Then there are more subtle ones. You know, like the mind, that's an existent. Anger is an existent. If it's in my mind, it's an existent. We have to establish what it is, and then we recognize it, and that's an existent phenomenon. Okay, it's still a lie, but there's a lie exists. The thing it believes in does not exist, but the lie exists. Now, another type of phenomena, you can call, they're abstract, called the absence of something. So like I said before, the only person who cognizes a phenomenon called the absence of something, it's abstract phenomenon, right? It's not evident to your eyes. It's not evident to your senses, but it is a real phenomenon that does exist. So because of the mistake, because of the mistake in my mind that expect tea, I expected tea. Because the mistake in my mind, I expected, Yuval, my husband of 27 years, to be in the house. And I get home and I find a note that he's left me for Kate. So I get the shock of my life. So the phenomenon that I now cognize is a real phenomenon, but for me is called, in my house, there is a phenomenon called the absence of Yuval. I'm wanting him to be there. I'm wishing he could be there. We're cognizing absences all the time. When we look in the mirror and think I'm ugly, we're seeing the absence of beauty. We're seeing absences all the time, and they're not happy absences. So it's always based upon what you want and anticipate and expect, a particular kind of thing like this. So I'm expecting tea. So I pick up my thermos and about to drink, and I get a shock. Oh my God, there's no tea. Oh my God, there's no Yuval. That'll happen, it happens all the time. So, okay, is my mind cognizing something? Yes, my mind is cognizing that there is no tea in my thermos. Now, my mind is cognizing something, and whatever my mind cognizes is an existent. So what's the name of the existent? What's the name of the phenomenon that I am cognizing? Turn "there is no tea in my thermos" into a noun phrase. It's called the absence of tea. It's called the absence of Yuval. And that is an existent phenomenon. There is existing in my house the phenomenon called the absence of Yuval. Now, only I will see it if I've known that Yuval was there and I expect him to be there. So, of course, it's an abstract phenomenon, but it's vividly clear. And the way the mind cognizes, the mind always cognizes nouns. So there are some kind of phenomena that are affirmative phenomena, like a computer. Another one would be the presence of tea in my thermos. Tea is a phenomenon that does exist where? In my thermos. Now, if I'm expecting tea and I discover, oh my God, there is no tea in my thermos, turn "there is no tea in my thermos" into a phenomenon, and it's a noun. The absence of tea. That is a real phenomenon that does exist. Where? Exactly where I thought the tea should be. If I put my hand in my pocket to get $5 to give to the homeless person, and I go, oh, what did I just discover? The absence of $5 in my pocket. So we believe in the presence of an intrinsic me. We believe in absolute certainty since beginningless time in the presence of an intrinsic me, an independent me. We believe in that. So when we discover finally in our single point of concentration, after years and if not lifetimes of meditating on dependent arising, and the penny will drop and we'll go, oh my God, there is not, has never been, and cannot be that kind of I. What have you just cognized? The absence of an independent me. And where does that exist? Right here in the me, the conventional me. So whatever the mind cognizes is a phenomenon. It is an existent. We have to realize this abstract existent called emptiness of independent me. We're going to have to squeeze our brains and get used to the words. You know, it takes time, that's all. And then we're in sync with reality, no longer disconnect. This is why Lama Zopa's experience is so delicious, you know. I always tell this story, and some of you must know it. What time is it? Yeah, it's time to go really soon. So there's this wonderful story. Rinpoche is you know, he's a Sherpa. He was renowned as a meditator in his past life. He was known as Kunsang Yeshe, a layman, a humble Nyingma practitioner, a layman who'd go, you know, had family and go back and forth to Tibet selling salt or something, doing whatever they do to survive, you know. And he, the last few years of his life, he kind of, there's a little spot in a little hole in the wall. He said it was given to him by Guru Rinpoche, and they stored the onions in there, or radishes, I never know which. And they're called, and the name for them in Sherpa language is laudo. So he pulled the onions out and he moved in, and it became his cave. So he became known as the Laudo Lama, like the onion lama, basically. So he spent the last 20 whatever years of his life meditating. Great tantric yogi, you know. So like all these great tantric yogis, he's got complete control over the 8 stages of death, complete control in his meditation throughout the day. And, you know, and then finally comes to the death time, and he's meditating, and he's able to choose, and they all choose exactly their future life. They're able to, you know, organize their life in the future. They're able to do that, these yogis, because they're clairvoyant and they've got this power. They've got control over all the different components of the mind and the external world, the greatest yogis, you know. So he was reborn as his little boy. I don't know his name at the time. He was changed his name later. He's known as Thupten Zopa. His name was later that. I don't know what his name was then. I forget. So when he's a tiny boy, I interviewed his sister. Now that this Laudo cave is now like a center, a retreat center up in the mountains, north, up above Solukhumbu, you know, in Solukhumbu, up above Namche Bazaar. And so we've been leading treks there the last couple of years. I've never walked up a mountain in my whole life, but I did little treks up there. It's been very fascinating. So anyway, it's a marvelous place. And his sister, Samten, has been, Annie Samten, she's been running, she's like couple of years older than me. She's like 79 or something. I'm 77 this year. So she has been running this place with her mummy. Her mummy died 20 years ago, 25 years ago, just running it all her life, up and down. Her knees are completely gone from up and down the mountains a million times, digging potatoes and taking care of people. She's incredible. So she talks about when he was a little boy. She was 6 when he was born, and the father had died after that, soon after that. And so she just sort of how he was very different, you know. She didn't know much when she was 6. He always behaved slightly differently and sat on the box when he ate his meals and sat on his own. And every time mummy turned her back, little Zopa, from the time he could crawl, he'd be gone. They'd always find him crawling, his little bare bottom, no doubt, up the path, you know, that led to the Laudo cave. And there'd be a spot they called the resting spot where they'd sit and relax a bit on their walk up before, you know. So there's little Zopa asleep, you know, curled up asleep. They'd drag him home. And from the time he could talk, every time mummy turned her back, little Zopa's gone again. They'd be crazy with him, you know. So it's evident, if we take this as a truth, that these yogis they don't lose control. They don't lose their memory. They get reborn. They choose their new rebirths. They know exactly who they are. And he wanted to get on with the job, you know, no wasting time. He wanted to carry on meditating. So by the time he could talk and mummy would get him and drag him home, come home, he'd say, no, that is my home. So he acted very differently. And when he'd play games, he'd play the role of a lama. He'd make mud pie dodges and mud pie bells and mud pie tormas, always playing the role of a lama. And he would announce that all his benefactors were coming to the puja, and he'd give the names of the previous yogi, you know, all his previous benefactors from the previous life. So mummy thought she'd better check up, so spoke to the local lamas, and they did their divinations, and it came out that yes, it would seem he is the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. Anyway, there he is. They take him up to the mountains, and he tells this story a few times, you know, and it's told differently, but this is how I heard it. He said would have been about 8 at this point, in 1950. He was born in 44 or something, same year as me, I think, but never sure, because this is one of the interesting extra points. It seems that the new incarnation, Lama Zopa, was born before Kunsang Yeshe died. He was conceived before Kunsang Yeshe passed away. This is not uncommon, because these yogis have the power to go to the womb that is the most convenient. And if it gets the conditions are there and he hasn't died yet, they'll zap their mind into that and become another person, and then they'll conveniently die. This is not uncommon. Apparently, one of Lama Yeshe's close friends and Lama Zopa's gurus, called Jampa Wangdu, this, you know, Tibetan yogi, he was in meditation in Dharamsala for years, and then it seems his reincarnation, this Chinese boy, he was conceived before Jampa Wangdu died. These great yogis can do that, because even the lowest level bodhisattva is capable of manifesting the lowest level, and there are 10 levels of the bodhisattvas once they've realized emptiness. They're capable of manifesting at least 100 different forms simultaneously. And as you progress all the way to Buddhahood, then you're literally capable of manifesting countless bodies throughout space, throughout universes, for the sake of suffering sentient beings. It's all listed, laid out in the Bodhisattva teachings, which are pretty outrageous, you know, pretty amazing. So anyway, he's in about 1952 or something, would have been about 8. And the story goes something like this. He's had a manager, he was at a monastery or something, and they call it, you know, they're very professional. They call them managers. He's handed over to the monastery, you know, because he's a tulku, a reincarnated little lama. So there's this big river. And I mean, if you've been up there, the rivers are really torrential, you know, they're really intense rivers. Water just cascading, very intense. And he sees across the other side of the river these unusual looking people. This is in 52, remember? And they're pale colored eyes, he said, straw colored hair. Well, obviously they're white people, and he's never met white people before. They sound like Swedes, frankly, but never mind, whatever they were. So anyway, he wanted to meet them. He was dying to meet them. So you can't go empty-handed, so he had a bowl of potatoes. I think his manager wouldn't let him go, but he insisted. So he's walking on this rickety little bridge. I mean, they're very rickety, these bridges, I tell you. And he fell in the water. Well, I mean, I promise you, they don't teach them swimming up there, and it's really intense. So this is how Rinpoche told the story. And this is the point, I'm going to go into it. He said, the head kept coming to the surface for air. Now, what would we say? I came to the surface for air. This panic-stricken, hysterical, fear-based, panic-stricken little me, do you understand, would have come full of fear, we would have said it like that. He said the head. So this is the background is, and even what he says in a minute, this is the way you train the mind. We're so obsessed. It's I am angry. I am jealous. I am fat. I am depressed. It's really powerful. So an incredibly powerful way to practice, forget even emptiness. We just over exaggerate the I. So there is anger. There is depression. There is, you can say I. We get so caught up in the label I, we give it too much status. This is the point. So it's really powerful. And that's how they talk in Buddhist psychology anyway. Anger does this. Jealousy does that. Love thinks this. It's much more precise, but we're so personal about everything. The head. So you could see his manager having a panic attack running on the bank, The head came to the surface for air. Then he said to himself, no, he says now, the thought he said now was, I didn't know anything about emptiness. And in other words, at the age of 8, he hadn't heard any teachings. So he wouldn't have been saying then to himself, I didn't know anything about emptiness. He's saying that now. I didn't know anything about emptiness, but he said, there was no fear. This is the point now. This is hard to conceptualize. Because fear for us, so for fear, we don't always think we have fear, but analyze all the delusions, analyze attachment. When you've got strong grasping at something, when it's really manifest, strong grasping, it's completely riddled with fear. The panic thought of, I cannot let this go. That's exactly what causes fear. The fear of not getting, the fear of losing, the fear of anticipating, it's driven by fear. Anger, we're so used to thinking, oh, look at that person over there, she's having an angry fit. She's screaming and shouting, her eyes are wide, spit coming out the mouth, irrational words pouring out, tears coming out of the eyes. Oh, look at it, she's angry. Excuse me, look again. She's having a complete hysterical mental breakdown, totally driven by the hysterical thought of I not getting what I want. So it's absolutely evident that all the delusions are rooted in ego grasping, the root delusion, and that its name is fear. You see, occasionally strong fear arises that we label fear. But all the delusions are the expression of fear because they're all the expression of the root delusion. So they're driven by, they're dripping in, their taste is fear. Look, what do you think? Anxiety is a mild panic attack. Everything, all the delusions are a belief in a certain characteristic and all rooted in attachment or aversion. There are 84,000 different delusions, as young Ling Rinpoche always says when he goes around teaching. And many people say they haven't heard this before, and I'd never heard it before. There are 84,000 distinct neurotic states of mind, like this map of the mind. He says 21,000 are rooted. There are these 3 root delusions, right? 21,000 are rooted in the root delusion, maripa, ignorance, the primordial delusion. 21,000 are rooted in that. 21,000 are rooted in attachment, and 21,000 are rooted in ego, in anger. And then the other 21,000 rooted in all 3. So it's a really coherent map of the mind, and all the neuroses are rooted in ego grasping. So when you realize there is not, has never been, and could never be that kind of I, then you have cut fear, then you've cut attachment. If you no longer believe in an intrinsic me, then there's nothing to be attached to. There's nothing to be angry about. There's nothing to be jealous about. There's nothing to be all the other disturbances. They're just dropped away. When the root is cut, the branches wither. It's exactly the point here. And that's why it's so important to understand the Buddhist model of the mind really precisely. We don't study it.
Venerable Robina, we've got about 6 minutes left.
Thank you, darling. We just don't study it. We don't know, you see. This is the tragedy. This is the tragedy. So we can't make up what we think Buddha means by the mind. We have to know what he means by the mind. Then we'll understand all these words. So as Lama Zopa says, when you realize emptiness, there's no fear. Of course, that will increase as you get more and more realizations. Literally, you'll become fearless. That's Harry's example, falling off the mountain. I told you that story, right? Didn't I? Harry. Yes. There was no fear in his mind. There was no fear. The thing that grips us, that causes us to do most of the things we do is fear, which is driven by the ego grasping. So if you've cut that fantasy from the mind, you don't cut the I, you cut the belief in the fantasy I. This is what causes this is fearlessness. So the thing is, we believe, I think it's Mr. Darwin or somebody talked about instinct for survival as a scientific fact. Well, it's true. Look at animals, the elephants and the tigers and the humans and the dog and the cat. When we are attacked, when we are offended, when a bad thing happens, this is the Buddhist approach, ego grasping arises like a sleeping lion and freaks out. Of course it does. But we assume that that is necessary in order to make decisions. Well, Buddha says, how stupid. Lama Zopa didn't need to believe in an intrinsic eye to notice he was drowning. That's called intelligence. He didn't need to know, he didn't need to have an intense fear of drowning. And this is the point. We think if he didn't have an intense fear of drowning, if he didn't have this instinct for survival, he would have sunk to the bottom of the river like a stone and went, okay, I'm drowning, it doesn't matter. That's nihilism. It's absurd. He knew he was drowning, but as he said, there was no fear. So he kept his mind clear. He managed to do it. He was kicking and thing, and his head came to the surface, but he wouldn't have been driven by fear or instinct to survive, which is what we assume, because he had the realization of emptiness, which you cannot lose, was in his mind. Intellectually, he knew nothing about it, that life. He hadn't learned yet, but it was in his mind. So of course, there was no grasping at an eye. There was only compassion and virtue, because that's his mind. So luckily he got out and the manager saved, probably felt bad or whatever. It's very powerful to understand, Harry wouldn't have had fear, which implied he'd realized emptiness. That amazing, outrageous example I always give when you've got bodhicitta and emptiness, both. The story that Kirti Santrab Rinpoche, this Lama, I always quote, I don't forget this, but I heard it so vividly. He said, for a certain level bodhisattva, the implication being they've also realized emptiness, the action of cutting off their hand and feeding it to a starving animal is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. So that person's not stupid. He knows it's his hand. He's not stupid. He knows the hand is now cut off and the blood is spurting. But because of no grasping at a self-existent eye and unbelievable bodhicitta and compassion, you wouldn't do that without compassion. The action, in other words, his compassion and his realization of no self, his realization of how things exist, was so utterly powerful. They overrode any thought of pain. There must have been some pain there, but this is proving that actually our view of the pain, our anger, our fears, our jealousy, our attachment, they are why we suffer, not because of the pain. This is a very shocking concept. It was as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. That's from the realization of emptiness and the realization of bodhicitta. And then when I think about Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he had his stroke in 2011, I was in Australia at the time, at the centre, a Tisha centre, and they took him off to hospital that night. And next day, Roger was videoing the whole thing because they were in the hospital for various weeks with some of the monks and Roger. And it was just like ridiculous. Lama Zopa on the next morning, he'd been diagnosed with this stroke. And Roger was interviewing him and just he chatted, sent a little message. Well, he looked like a drunken senile person because he couldn't speak properly, but he was laughing the whole time. He was he was joyful. This is too weird to hear. We can't comprehend this level of compassion. We can't comprehend it, and this is absolutely rooted in the understanding of no inherent I. So he was able to totally, like we were talking before, using this experience of what's normally called suffering as totally grist for the mill for him to increase his realizations. I mean, that's what it looked like. Increase his compassion, increase his joy. These Catholic nuns couldn't get over this weird monks laughing the whole time, joyful, funny, cracking jokes. Normally when you have a stroke, everyone's having a mental breakdown. The opposite. They couldn't get over them, And Rinpoche especially, just incredible joy, incredible compassion, incredible, just like more and more joyful. It's like, it's too weird for us. We can't work it out, That's because he realized emptiness and got bodhicitta.
Venerable Robina? Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry, it is time, but it's just somebody has just reminded me in chat that you had agreed to lead a purification practice, and she
I
was
know that.
wondering
Yes, I'll do it tomorrow.
Is that okay?
I will definitely do it. I promise. I wanted to.
It was just to remind you. Thank you.
Yeah. Much, exactly. So, are there any questions about this? Otherwise, we can finish today. Well, think of your questions and we'll have them tomorrow, okay? All right, darlings? We'll sidetrack to emptiness. So, of course, if you realize emptiness, wait a second. Don't do it.
Sorry.
Don't worry. It's fine, darling. So the thing is, but I want to say one more thing, though. It's not as if you go from primordial fear to bliss. It's gradual. And this is the point. Even as you start to practice abiding by the laws of karma in junior school, and you loosen the grip of ego grasping, become more accountable, more coherent, more taking responsibility, less victim, less anger, less jealousy, less attachment, even just by abiding by the laws of karma, you're already becoming more content. And then you get to the second level of practice and you start dealing with your delusions. You're continually lessening neuroses, therefore lessening fear. You become more courageous and more virtuous. Then you get to the compassion when you keep adding bodhicitta. You get even more courageous and more marvelous and more joyful and less neurotic and therefore less fear. So it's a gradual incremental development. We can see already progress in our minds, you know. I mean, you know, Elizabeth's discussion of 8 years of having this, you know, this tumor, able, because of her dharma, her approach, her attitude changing in her mind, so the experience becomes radically different. So we're practicing this approach every day as we keep practicing. And then eventually when you realize emptiness, then you cut the root and the mind is even more marvelous, more joyful. And then, of course, as Lama Yeshe said, when you realize Mahamudra, which is in this particular teaching, is just really meaning emptiness, not only have you cut fear, but the very positing of an inherent intrinsic me also means the positing of a separate me. And if you have a separate me, then you have other. So as you loosen the sense of a separate me and you increase compassion, eventually when you realize emptiness and realize bodhicitta, there literally is no sense of a separate me. It's a gradual, incremental psychological process of development, you know. So keep practicing, everybody. Keep working, keep moving, keep practicing. Let's have those little prayers now, Steph. So this first one, we just think, we're dedicating, okay? I want to spell it out in more detail, then we can sing it in Tibetan. So we're thinking, you know, as a result of this activity we've done today, 3 hours of thinking, listening, analyzing, contemplating, you know, as a result of all these virtuous thoughts, positive thoughts, wisdom thoughts, how amazing, all these seeds we've planted. As a result of all this, may we quickly become the Buddha and oneness with our teacher. We haven't gone into that discussion at all. The Guru is just a name in Sanskrit, heavy with qualities, you know. Person you have chosen in human form to be the Buddha for you. As Lama Yeshe says, Buddha's dead. The Four Noble Truths won't be real for you until you hear them from the mouth of a person in front of you whom you have chosen as your Buddha. That's the function of the Guru. May we become, this is more like from Tantra really, this prayer. It's very sweet. Quickly is about implying Tantra, you know. Maybe become the Guru Buddha. Why? And then when I do that, I can then lead all suffering sentient beings effortlessly, without exception, to the same state. Kewadi nyududai lama sange drugyune rowa chikyang malupa dei sala kupasho. And this one, this aspiration and bodhicitta is amazing. Bodhicitta is not compassion, but it's the culmination of compassion. It's got two qualities. One is unceasingly, spontaneously, only to benefit whoever's in front of you. That's it. That's just your job. Like everybody's your mother. You're the mother of the whole universe. They're all your children. So it's your job. Of course it is. No question. And second, long term is never giving up, developing this love, compassion, generosity, morality, patience, perseverance, and all the rest. Life after life after life, becoming a Buddha, never giving up, because then you're qualified perfectly. So, Jang Chob Sem Chog Rinpoche, Ma Kye Panam Ke Gyo Chig, Kye Pa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yi, Gong Ne Gong Du, Peba Shog. So that the precious, where the precious bodhicitta, go back again. Sorry. Go back again. Just explain. So the bodhicitta that hasn't yet arisen in the minds of others, may it arise, and that which has arisen in minds, may it never decline, but increase more and more and more. That's that marvelous prayer. So next one, long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. How fantastic. And we think of all our lamas. If our lamas aren't mentioned here, we're going to do Lama Zopa, Lama, His Holiness. If our lamas aren't mentioned, we think, may they live long, because the world needs them badly, you know. We need these amazing examples on the planet. The Buddha in human form for us. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. So the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, this is the one that Lama Zopa Rinpoche wrote recently. Source of every, because he says it's not enough just to say this Tibet, because it's the whole world now. Source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. The incomparably kind, supreme Tenzin Gyatso. May your life be long and your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's the Lama of the center, some of our own lamas, maybe not yours, that's okay, but you wish that all the lamas exist long. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjushri's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples. Please, please live long. Okay. Thank you, sweethearts. So I'll see you tomorrow. We'll finish up. Well, tomorrow we're gonna talk about all the things to do once the mind has left the body. The different, just mentioning the various practices we could do, but the point is that it's really for another 49 days that this is traditional, as we know, because it can be up to 49 days that you're in the intermediate state in the bardo. It might be for 1 second that you're in the bardo, you know, but as much as anything, the practices we do are also for our benefit. This is the point, you know. So we'll discuss all that tomorrow, and we might discuss more about emptiness. We'll see what happens. Okay.
Thank you very much, Robina. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you so much.